Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage Wall Street Journal reporter Paul Vigna.
Hello. Hello, Queens. How you guys doing? Last time I was in Queens, true story, it was probably 2003, 2004. I went to a Lebowski Fest at a bowling alley. I have not been back since. So it's kind of cool to be in Queens again. It's fun. Usually when I do these kinds of talks, it is some kind of a variation on a what is Bitcoin talk. But I figure for this crowd, you guys don't need a what is Bitcoin talk. So I tried to drum up something a little different this week, which is why I actually asked for the lectern, because I had to write out some notes. So if I go a little, if it seems like I don't know exactly where I'm going, I at least have an idea of where I'm going. But I am inflicting on you something I haven't delivered in public before. So this is going to be kind of a new thing. So I'm actually here replacing Mike Casey. Mike couldn't make it, so I came. And I figured, well, what should I talk about? I'll talk about my book. Mike and I came out with a book in February called The Truth Machine, as a follow-on to a book we wrote in 2015 called The Age of Cryptocurrency. And that book was my first book. And I will tell you, my entire life, I had always wanted to write a book. I always wanted to have that hardcover book, my name on it. I grew up with that, And in 2013, I realized Bitcoin was a story, and it was a story that could have been a book. And my first thought was, I'm on this now. Nobody else is on this now. I want to jump on this. I want to get on this before anybody else. How can I get the book out first? I'll do an ebook. So I went home to my wife, and I had this great idea, and I said, honey, I'm going to write an ebook about Bitcoin. And my wife looked at me, and she said, you're going to write an electronic book about a virtual currency. And I said, yeah. And she just did not. It didn't compute to her. And I understand why. It didn't really compute to me either. We're of the generation that to us a book was a physical thing. And we're of the generation that cash was a physical thing. Currency was a physical thing. It was the dollars in your wallet, it was the dollars in your pocket. And I think those things are all changing, and it's can be hard to wrap your head around. But the idea of an ebook I thought was good, but I ended up talking to Mike about it, and Mike had already had an agent, so we end up doing a quote-unquote real book. And that was an entire process, and it was an interesting process. We had the agent who found a publisher. The publisher wrote a contract with us, and I'm going into a little detail about this, not to bore the hell out of you, but it actually is going someplace, trust me. And I'll actually do some Q&A too. So we got a publisher who put us working with an editor, and the editor had other editors that worked on the manuscript, and we had proofreaders, and we had fact checkers, and we had a legal review, and we had graphics people, and there's a factory somewhere, I don't know where, that actually put the book together and ran it on an assembly line and produced these thousands of copies of this book that were then shipped out on trucks somewhere. Again, I don't really know. I never saw any of it. All I ever saw was a book that landed on my desk, and it delivered them to Barnes & Noble or Amazon warehouses or wherever books are sold these days. And that, to me, was a very interesting process. That was, when you think about it, a physical book itself is a mini business venture. It is a little capitalist venture. A bunch of us came together and we wanted to produce this thing and sell it and get it out to you people because we thought we had this great, groundbreaking, earth-shattering story to tell. And we told it. But the thing about the ebook, it's kind of interesting because that is something that, we didn't really have the option of doing that 10 years ago. But in 10 years, the world has changed. Self-publishing is actually kind of respectable now. Ebooks, you can do it. People have bestsellers as ebooks. People get movies made into ebooks. The tools have changed for writers. 50 years ago, 100 years ago, writers had no choice but to find a publisher. You needed that infrastructure to write a book. You don't need that infrastructure today. That has all changed. I don't have any regrets about the way Mike and I went. I don't have any regrets about working with St. Martin's. I don't know how many of you know about the publishing business. You'll get complaints about it, about the contracts you sign and how the money gets dispensed. And, I didn't get as rich. Well, I didn't get rich at all. But, I probably would have made more money if I just quit my job and did a Bitcoin startup. But, we did fine. We're happy with it. I don't have any regrets about the way I went about it, and the benefit of doing it the way we did it was we got that entire team that had expertise and experience and context that we could have never replicated in putting the book out, and that helped us tremendously. It didn't help us so much that we didn't get Tim Swanson writing a 25,000-word blog post doing a takedown of the book, but if you know Tim, that's Tim. But we did get a lot out of that collaboration with St. Martin's Press for both these books. But we didn't have to go that way. And we didn't have to go that way because the tools are changing. And what I think is really interesting when you kind of pull back is an entire business model that has stood for hundreds of years today is changing in a very fundamental way. And I'm not talking about the book business. I'm talking about capitalism. I'm talking about something that has been around really kind of unchanged, developing a little bit for centuries. And I think to understand why this moment is important and why you guys are all here and why people are coming and why people like me get to write about this because our readers at the Journal want to hear about it, I think it's worth backing up a tiny bit into, and I know trust me, none of this is really boring, the history of ledgers. And I think a lot of things are appreciated about capitalism and well understood of why they have fueled this explosion of capitalism we've had over the last 500 years. The whole idea of the allocation of capital, the whole idea of the division of labor, the whole idea of the production line and the assembly and the factory. But I think what is less understood is the importance of the ledger. And I know that word resonates a lot with this crowd. And one of the most surprising thing to me to discover in doing research for this book, for The Truth Machine, was the importance of a late 15th century Franciscan friar by the name of Luca Pacioli, who wrote a guidebook to using ledgers. And today he's called the father of accounting. And it's interesting why he's called that, because he did not invent double entry bookkeeping. That was done in Arabia in the 7th century. He did not introduce double entry bookkeeping to Europe. That was done a couple of centuries before by a guy named Fibonacci. Some of you math nerds might know Fibonacci. So why is Luca Pacioli, this Franciscan friar, considered the father of accounting? It's not just that he wrote this book, which was kind of, in its day, it was kind of the double entry bookkeeping for dummies of its day. It was extremely popular. It was part of a mathematical treatise he wrote. They broke it out, publishers, they broke it out into a separate volume. It really sold like hotcakes. What Pacioli did was he equated bookkeeping with piety. In other words, he was a Franciscan friar. He was a man of God. And what he did for the first time was he said, keeping clean books, showing that for everything you are taking in, you are balancing it out with something you are giving out. That is a way to show humility before God. That is a way to show that you are doing your part for society. Nobody had ever done that before. And if you look, you don't need to be a biblical expert to know that. Before this, the whole idea of usury, of credit, was really held in dim regard by the Bible. And it was really held in dim regard in Catholic Europe. Pacioli changed all that. And in changing all that, he really underscored this explosion of capitalism. After that, it became okay to offer credit. It became something that you could do. And the Medicis took this on. And this is when banking comes into Europe. And this is how capitalism becomes this explosive force that takes over the globe over the course of 5 centuries. It really is this, and it really is amazing. I don't think people quite understood this. And you look at it today, and I think if I were, and I don't want to start a religious war, but if I were to ask how many people in this group, I'm not asking you to raise your hands, like I said, I don't want to start a religious war. If I were to ask how many people in this room believed in a literal God that lived somewhere above us on an ethereal plane and was looking down upon us in judgment and just I don't think I'd get a lot of hands. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't think I'd get a lot of hands. But if I asked you how many of you thought accounting was legitimate, I bet I'd get a lot of hands. We have come to believe in the absolute bedrock truth of the accounting ledger. We don't believe in God so much anymore, and but the accounting ledgers we believe without question. And 10 years ago, there was a firm, some of you may have heard of it, called Lehman Brothers. End of 2007, Lehman Brothers has a record year. Record earnings, record revenue. Best year. 170 years the firm has been around, and in 2007 they have their greatest year. 9 months later, Lehman Brothers is out of business. How does that happen? And how do you have the financial crisis? Because what you had was implicit trust put in these ledgers, and that trust was betrayed. And I think what you need to understand is that a ledger is a tool. That's all it really is. A blockchain is a tool. All of these technologies are tools. A hammer is a tool, and a hammer can do a lot of great things. If you've ever tried to put up drywall, well, you know you need a hammer, and a hammer can be great, and a hammer can help you build a house. And if you've watched enough TV, I hope you haven't experienced it firsthand, but if you've watched enough TV, you know that somebody could use a hammer also to bludgeon in their neighbors, and that's really awful. My point is that a hammer can be used, a hammer is amoral, a hammer is valueless. It is not the tool itself that has any purpose, it is the people who are using it that have purpose. It is you people who are trying to build blockchain products that give the blockchain its value, that you put in the morality, you put in the values, you give it a reason for being. And I don't think it was a big surprise that in 2008, Bitcoin went viral. I really don't. I think the technology is very interesting, and I think the idea that you could maybe make some money off of it is kind of interesting too. And I think people get that to a large extent, and that's why I think you see a lot of interest on Wall Street in the financial industry. They think, well, could we make some money off this? And I think that's why you see a lot of interest in the tech world. They think, wow, this is a really interesting product. Maybe we can build something new. But I think what is kind of less appreciated and less well understood is that 2008, the financial crisis, we see how these tools can be abused, and we see the betrayal of trust. And what I think is not well understood about this, you folks out here today, and everyone was going to be a consensus next week, is that this is a social movement. This is a social movement that was born out of a crisis, and it is a response to that crisis. It is a response to everything that went lousy in that crisis, and everything that hurt us, and everything that cost hundreds of thousands of jobs, and threw the global economy into a complete tailspin. They are trying to find a better way. You had the Tea Party, you had Occupy Wall Street. Those are social movements as well, but those were political based. This is a technology based movement, but it is a movement nonetheless. And why is this important now, 10 years later? Because I think you have a similar dynamic going on now that you had a decade ago in a different way. 500 years ago, you needed an army, some brilliant generals, and very favorable weather if you wanted to overthrow a government. Today, you need an AdSense account and a Facebook page. Technology has allowed us, them, everybody, to do things that were not possible before. And I was walking through the art gallery earlier. I don't know if any of you walked through the art gallery. It's really interesting. There's one in there. I took the flyer. Jessica Angel. It's called Visual Complexity and Networks. I wish I had more time. I wish I had known about it. I would have pulled up a visual of it. It is a really interesting graphic, black and white, and it's just a lot of lines drawn between different points, and it is about network architecture and how it's exploding. And it's interesting. It's 42 by 30 inches. You know, it's like this by this, and it's very complex. And if you get a chance, go and look at it, and then think about the entire wall looking like that. And then think about that entire wing looking like that. And then think about this entire room looking like that. We are building networks upon networks upon networks, and we are building them at a rapid speed. There is a lot of technology coming on board, and a lot of you are probably familiar with at least some of it. Certainly you know blockchains, AI, Internet of Things. I wrote down a whole list of them. Driverless cars. You know, it's interesting. I ran into one of our auto reporters earlier this week, and we were having a little conversation about cars. And I said, hey, what do you think about driverless cars? Expecting him to kind of talk about the experience of driving compared to the experience of being in a driverless automobile. But that wasn't what he wanted to talk about. Instead, he goes on this what can only be described as a rant, a very informed rant, but a rant nonetheless, about driverless automobiles and about driverless cars and about that technology and about the fact that a lot of that is being pursued because the biggest cost to trucking companies, to transportation companies, the biggest cost after fuel are people. And if they can cut their costs, if they can get people out of those cars, if they can run those trucks automatically, that is going to be huge for them. And the thing he said to me was, he said, this is happening. This is already happening, and we have not even begun to discuss the social impact of it. And that, I think, that resonated with me. And I think what is really, really important is that we start discussing the social impact of all these technologies and the interaction of all these technologies. Because I think they're all fascinating on their own, but I think when you put them together, and they will be put together, you are going to have some really interesting things made, hopefully some wonderful things made, some tremendous things. This whole idea of decentralized energy, of having microgrids, and having the Internet of Things, solar panels, and blockchain put together, that's really fascinating. The whole idea of supply chains, and again, Internet of Things, being able to track global production, all really, really fascinating. A lot of people are going to be put out of work, and I'm not here to say, well, it's bad. I'm not here to sugarcoat it. I mean, I think that is going to be a problem. I think we need to start discussing the social impact of what we, not me, I'm just reporting, I'm just writing books, what you folks are building. So the real message, I think it's really interesting to go to conferences and to listen to other tech people talk about what they're building. I really think we need to start talking to economists and sociologists, and we really need to thinking about what this world is going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years, because I do believe that this is all going to happen. I don't think it's inevitable. This could all fall apart, but I do think it's going to happen. I think there's a lot of momentum. There's a lot of intelligence that's being put to this. The thing I would leave you with, and I'm going to take some Q&A. One thing I would suggest is, rather than go to another conference, take a week off, rent a car, and go drive out into the country. Go drive across the country. Take a couple of weeks. It's summertime. It's a great time to get in a car and get on a local highway and drive through 5, 10, 15 states and see the country and talk to people and get a sense of what we need, what products we need, what can help, what's being built out there, which way things are going. And you know, let's really start trying to kind of look at this from that 30,000-foot view. Let's really start trying to figure out not just what gee whiz thing we can build, but what gee whiz thing is really going to be valuable to people. I want to see this technology do well. I want to see this technology become part of our everyday lives. But if all this technology does is get a couple people rich off some scammy ICOs, and it gets a couple of people their Lambos and their island paradises, then you have really missed a moment. And I don't want to see that happen. So that's my message, and I'm happy to take some questions if anyone's got them. And if not, I can just get back to work because, like I'm on the clock today. No, really, anyone, any questions? You want to shout them out? Or yeah. How do you incentivize the network of trust? Stick a token in the middle of it? I mean, it's really, I'm saying, I said that kind of facetiously, but I'm really not saying it facetiously. I mean, I think one of the really beautiful things about Bitcoin, and I'll just leave it at Bitcoin, is it really does have an amazing sort of system of levers and pulleys and ways to incentivize people. And I really think that's underappreciated. I don't think people understand how much Bitcoin, the token, is an incentive for people to use Bitcoin, the system. So, yeah, I mean, there are probably a million different ways to do it, but that is one way to do it. People like to get paid. I mean, people like to get paid. So, yeah, that's simple enough. Anybody else?
Here's a microphone over here.
There's a mic here, yeah.
So whoa, it's hot. It's hot. I'm curious your thoughts on what's going to be an obstacle as AI growth persists.
Yeah.
Because if people are spending less on overhead, that means that they're now able to probably lower the cost of their goods down the line, which makes it more cheaply to live for certain products and services. From my experience, I've seen this happen plenty of times, but the government never lets the price of goods go down. Instead, they subsidize it and cause a chain reaction of kind of ruining the growth and the technological advancement.
Yeah, I think, look, I think there are a host of technological problems right now that need to be ironed out, and I think that's what all you guys are working on. But I think even bigger than that, I think is going to kind of be what you're getting at, which is the cultural issue. I think a lot of people, and I know I had this problem too when I first got introduced to this, a lot of people have a hard time wrapping their heads around this technology and what it's going to do and the value of it. Some people get past that. I did. Some people don't. But also, when I talk about cultural issues, is sort of how are we going to use this technology and reshape the process, reshape those things that existed in capitalism. And I don't have a big problem with capitalism. I wasn't coming here to bash capitalism. But I think it is going to be fundamentally changed, and there are going to be pros and cons to that. And some of the cons are going to be painful, and people are going to resist it. So I think the cultural impact of this, I actually think is the biggest issue, is just getting people comfortable with it and building it in such a way that it is not going to be too disruptive. That'd be my answer.
So whether it's transportation or education or real estate, they're going to be
a little closer.
Whether it's transportation or education or real estate, there are going to be a lot of jobs that disappear, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
So what's government's role? What should government's role be in solving this, and when are they going to take their heads out of the sand?
Universal basic income. Oh, I didn't say that out. Did I say that out loud? I think the very honest answer is I don't know. But you definitely hit on something important. At some point, the government is going to have to respond to this in some manner. What frightens me about that is I don't think our government officials have a very good sense of what this technology is right now. I think there might be a handful of people in Congress who've gotten it, who've grokked it. I think government at some point needs to get involved in this, and I think they are way behind on the learning curve, and that's a problem right now. But there's going to have to be a government response at some point.
How did you establish yourself as the cryptocurrency journalist at the Wall Street Journal, and what is the sentiment towards cryptocurrency in the Wall Street Journal editorial staff?
What's the opinion? Okay, well, first I'll answer the first part. I became the Wall Street Journal's cryptocurrency expert because I got interested and nobody else was writing about it. And that's the God's honest answer. I was a markets reporter, I wrote for our blog, and I just kind of got interested, and nobody else was doing it, so they let me do it. And that was it. I had no great expertise in technology. I just thought it was kind of cool and wanted to write about it. And within a couple of months, I got that this was a big story. So that was literally all it took. And then I just took it and I just ran with it. And I didn't get displaced. And that's it. As for the editorial board's position on it, I can't speak to that. The reporting side and the editorial side are separate, so I really can't speak to what their take is on it.
I just wanted to build off one of the earlier questions, talking about how this technology could reduce the cost of goods or services. When e-commerce came around, many people were saying the same thing, that this would result in significant reduction of costs. We did not see that. And so the question here is, do you think that we would have the same experience with this technology and not see ultimately the costs going down, or what would we have to do things differently?
Yeah, I think probably this technology will have an effect on costs, probably will lower costs. But to your point about e-commerce not affecting jobs, not affecting society, I would disagree completely, actually. You look at what has happened to salaries in this country over the last decade or so, you have seen them stagnate. You look what has happened to the global workforce, it has changed dramatically. It's been e-commerce, and it's not e-commerce alone, but I mean that technology has had a great impact on workers in the developing world, and I think that's a good thing. It has had less of a great impact here, and I think you see a lot of people are still out of work, and you have a lot more economic uncertainty right now. And a generation ago, 2 generations ago, in the 50s, say, like the idea of a job for life was a real thing. And a generation ago, when my father was raising a family, he had one job, and his wife stayed home and raised the kids. How many families live like that now? You have 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and you are trying to raise the same family. So I think technology has had a huge impact on society, and I don't think that was addressed early on, and I think that led to a lot of those problems. And I think that is going to continue to lead to problems, and I think we need to start thinking about that. I'm not saying it has to be dystopian and awful, even though I'm a huge Walking Dead fan and I like dystopian things. It doesn't have to be awful, but it does have to be addressed, because it is going to have an impact. And I'm at 000, so I think I have to get out of here. Sorry, I can't answer your last, unless you want to do it real quick. Make it like a 10-second question that I can do yes or no.
So you mentioned driving through the countryside to gain some insights about the potential of technology.
Yeah.
Just curious, in your experience driving through the countryside, were there any specific applications that you feel?
No, and it'd be, and again, I know my time is out. It'd be great if you were like somewhere and you ran into some people and you got this flash of insight and you came up with the product, right? God bless you, and you'll make $1 million, maybe $1 billion, great. But I think just even if you didn't come out of an experience like that with the one great idea, I just think the sort of expansion of your worldview will be worthwhile, and eventually that will help inform you, and maybe later you come up with that one great idea. So again, I encourage you to just get out and see the world, whatever it comes up. And I'm being given the sign, hey, listen, everyone, thank you very much for coming out. I really do appreciate it, and I will talk to you soon.